Yo, 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 good morning, good morning, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Research Rebels, another Research Rebels critical conversation. I'm teaching on the move here with, of course, Khalil, and of course, our guest for this morning, which is Dr. Josef Köstlbauer. Dr. Josef Köstlbauer is a historian and research associate at the Institute of Habsburg and Balkan Studies at the Austrian Academy of Sciences. His scholarly journey spans from Vienna, Berlin, Bonn, and New Orleans. Dr. Köstlbauer brings a deeply interdisciplinary lens to the study of early modern history, slavery, with a centralized focus on the role of Moravian church and Central European participation and impact both on the continent and the Atlantic world. His research spans the semantics of slavery in 18th century Moravian, sources to explorations of colonial borderlands, historical media cultures, and the history of digital games as sites of simulation and meaning making. His most recent publication, entitled "Community, Self and Dependency, Enslaved Voices in Moravian Lebenslauf," was released last May in Life Writing. So, Dr. Köstlbauer, welcome. So good to have you. And we're ready to dive in.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Great pleasure to be here.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm just going to jump right in with our questions here. And the first one is just more so just to get an understanding of your expertise. There's a lot of people who, we're introducing to you or introducing them to you for the first time. What called you to this area of research regarding Central European involvement in enslavement in both Europe and in the Atlantic world?
Yeah, I would like to say that this was due to a deep intellectual curiosity on my side, or that it was the result of some sort of calling. But as it is very often the case, it was a matter of chance, really. Several plans for projects and so on had fallen through, and I was applying for jobs. And at the University of Bremen at the time, there was an ERC, a European Research Council funded project, and that was called The Holy Roman Empire of the German Nation and its Slaves, so about slavery and enslaved people in early modern Germany. And I believe it or not, I have actually been doing American colonial history. And I knew a bit about the Atlantic slave trade, of course, and about Native American slavery and so on. And with this expertise, I was selected for that project. And that was really quite a journey for me. I started to work on the Moravian church. And going into German archives and looking for these scattered, fragmented sources on slavery there. It was a matter of chance, but I'm very happy it came about this way. And ever since I've been very interested in doing research on enslavement, but also on this whole spectrum of dependency and bondage, coercion that was happening in early modern Europe, and which enslavement was one part of. Because I'm also very interested in how early modern Germans understood slavery or enslavement as a concept, how they perceived enslaved people, That's where the historical semantics come in.
For sure. And I feel like, a lot of times, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier before we started, but people don't know too much, at least on this side of the world and in North America, the impact of German or Central Europeans' ability to be a part of this trade, right? A lot of it, again, gets caught up with England and Spain and Portugal, a lot of the bigger names, but Central Europeans, they played a major role in this path. And so I'm glad that, you're speaking to a little bit of that. And we're going to talk a little bit about it much later in this session. But, we have many followers of our content who may or may not know the complexities of artwork. And that's going to be one of the major focuses of our interview, particularly from the Baroque style and its various meanings or interpretations. And so for our audience, what is the most basic definition of an allegory?
Well, an allegory is a symbolic representation of an abstract idea or an abstract concept, for example, justice or love. And in the 17th and 18th century, in European Baroque art, allegories and emblems become really ubiquitous in visual communication. So you find them everywhere. I mean, we still have this kind of symbolic communication. For example, we know a heart stands for love, or scales may stand for justice. But in the 17th and 18th century, that's really like everywhere. And it's especially in visual arts, it's you can say this is like a complex visual rhetoric. And its allegories are used to transmit narratives, statements, political and religious messages, and so on. And of course, to understand or to communicate through visual art, you have to have a set of conventions, established modes of representing or depicting certain ideas and concepts. Otherwise, the audience wouldn't be able to understand this. That's like modern pictograms telling us where to find a bathroom when we are at the airport, or where the baggage pickup is. Yeah, all these pictures, these images only make sense if you have a certain cultural background. Right. Otherwise, they are meaningless. And as something that's also very typical for Baroque art is that many of these allegories are personifications. And today we are going to talk about personifications of the 4 continents, the 4 parts of the world, die 4 Erdteile in German. And you already pulled up this set of pictures from Cesare Ripa's Iconologia. And there you see that there are, in this case, female figures for Africa on the left side and Europe on the right side. And there are all sorts of attributes and characteristics that made it very clear to the early modern audience what was meant here.
Yeah, one of the Joseph, how you doing? This is Khalil again. And then so one of the things that we really wanted to point out was like in allegory, like there was commonalities, right? So during the earlier times of explosion, like that whole idea of like, the 4 continents. So one of the main questions that I had in noticing, like, why were women and children like used in the paintings and in sculptures, and these personification of these landmarks of the land? Like, what's the significance of the women and children?
Yeah, well, it's important to see that it's not only women and children. So you also find a lot of male personification of the 4 continents. So you have all female sets, you have all male sets, and sometimes you have mixed sets. And by children, I assume you mean these chubby little naked figures, the putti.
Yeah, I do mean that, because I did take a trip to Europe, particularly like in the Vatican and just in Rome itself. It was the cherubims with the little wings, little boys and things like So I found it. I always thought it, and correct me if I'm wrong, I always thought it meant like, young, right? As far as, impressionable, or young in the sense of like, you have the old world and then you have the new world. So anything that's new and just being discovered, they personified it as a baby or young.
Well, that's a logical explanation, but actually, it's really a convention that goes back, and it carries more a sense of playfulness, of exuberance. And you find these, also in the Baroque era and in art history today, these child figures are called putti, from Latin putius, for boy. Well, like 99% of times it's boys. This comes from ancient Greece and Rome, where they already had these images of small gods or messengers of love, and they were called the erotes. And when Renaissance Italy rediscovers antiquity and its arts, they take up these characters, this motif, and they call it putti. And at first, they're used to depict little angels, because also in antiquity they have wings. Now they are little angels, and very often they have instruments, because angels were associated with celestial music and all that. But then this motif moves from the religious art into secular art, and you will also find it in palaces and sitting rooms, and they are literally everywhere, and they always have this. They transmit this sense of playfulness, of exuberance, and sometimes they're used to. Sometimes they accompany allegories of the 4 continents, and sometimes they're even used as personification of the 4 continents. I didn't pull up, I forgot to send you the picture, but we have out of this continent allegory project, we had a volume, and on the cover.
Oh yeah, you talk about your book. Yeah.
There are the 4 continents.
We got that image.
As the 4 continents.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to.
This is just a standard thing in Baroque art. There's this endless game of variation. So you could have males, you could have females, you could have children. It's all part of this attempt by artists to surprise and to exalt the audience.
Okay. So back to, like you said, the 4 continents and the different symbols that they have. What's the significance of like dealing with like Africa, and they have the elephant on the head, and then she's holding a scorpion, and then she's also holding a cornucopia, and then there always seems to be like a lion or snakes or some type of exotic animals. And then over here, when you have Europa, I always see like the white horse, right? And then she's also with, fruit also. And then a lot of times you see her with like a book or a map, representing like education or things of that nature. Yeah.
Well, all these attributes, which kind of serve as characteristics that help you to recognize which continent is meant, a lot of them go back to antiquity. So in ancient Romans and Greeks didn't have allegories for the continents because they had a slightly different conception of the world, but they had allegories for towns and cities. And these kind of were the models for these continent allegories. And the elephant headdress, the so-called elephant exuvia, this is something that goes back to ancient personifications of so not only cities but also Roman provinces, and this was the Roman province Africa, which is somewhere in northern Africa. And they just took this or adapted this in the Renaissance, and this carried on into the Baroque. And again, what's it called? The cancer is an attribute that probably refers to the Tropic of the Cancer. Okay. The cornucopia with the grain spilling out, that refers to the abundance of ancient North Africa, which was the breadbasket of Rome. Mm-hmm. And then of the lion is associated with Africa. Well, that makes sense. And also the wealth of the cornucopia could also relate to the wealth of Egypt, because this was also very present in the minds of antiquity, but also in the Baroque era, that Egypt was a rich country.
Okay.
Yeah. And also the coral that she wears around her neck, that's also referring to Africa and its riches. And yeah, you find these elements again and again. And if we look to Europe, you see, so she's presented as a queen. That's also fairly typical. And to her feet, you see a lot of crowns, including the crown of the Pope, the papal tiara, and sceptres, because there was this idea, and also the text, there's this Italian text below it, explains this, that Europe is the seat of the most powerful monarchies. And in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, there was this idea of Europe as a republic of Christian monarchies, Christian sovereign states. And again, the fruits are reference to abundance, to fertility. This little temple she's holding refers to the church. So, of course, Europe is the seat of the church. And in this case, of course, the Catholic Church is meant. The horse and the weapons, they refer to war or the warlike nature of Europe. That's also fairly typical, that Europe is not only the Christian continent, it's also the most advanced continent on a military level. Whether that's true or not, but that was the sentiment of the times, of course. Yes, I think we have all of the attributes. And I think we will see later examples where you can find these things, not all of them. There's always a bit of variation, but they come up again and again and again, and are used and reused again and again.
Yeah. Did they know, did the regular public know of these symbols and images?
That's a very good question. Mm-hmm. Well, in the beginning, this is certainly an elite program. I mean, Renaissance, as Italian humanism, that's a matter of scholars and princes. But then, because there's this sort of a media revolution going on, with a print being devised and suddenly broadsheets being printed and distributed, and you have all this building. You have this building boom, and you have these big churches that are with frescoes and sculptures, and they're all they're all using these allegories and emblems. So this is something that kind of trickles down from upper class palatial surroundings to basically to all parts of the population. So because the churches were accessible to all believers, some of the big public buildings were accessible to all or many people. And of course, prints becoming cheaper and cheaper. People bought prints just to decorate their homes. So they would become acquainted with these with this visual language and learn to decipher it. Also, I'm sure that there are differences between more scholarly surroundings, like, I don't know, a Jesuit university, and surroundings where you're like a village church, where really you want to also educate and elucidate these villagers about theology and or belief and practices of piety and so on.
Excellent. And I have a follow-up question to the continents piece that we were talking about, right? So we've seen maps upon maps that represent all the various continents, but typically the older maps tend to focus on the 3 continents, as if there was only 3 continents of the world, right? Africa, Europe, and Asia, right? What does this say about the understanding or lack thereof during that time period regarding the rest of the so-called unknown world?
Yeah, well, The allegories of the four continents really become a popular motif only after the European discovery of the America, and there's not an equally popular set of three continents that's used all the time. It's really the four continents, and you can only do that in Europe after Columbus came back, obviously. And but you pose a very good question. So, that is America for a time at least the less important continent? And there is this, in some depictions, there is this civilizational idea that you have of course, Europe is the Christian continent and the most exalted continent because of that. And then you have the other two continents of the so-called Old World, Asia and Africa, and they're both sort of rich, and they have or had big civilizations. And then there's the new continent, which is sort of fresher or maybe childlike. And this idea is certainly there, at least for some time. And I mean, you're showing here the frontispiece of Abraham Ortelius' Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, and from the 16th century. And I think this might be at least read as an example of this. So very clearly, Europe sitting on top, and at the bottom there's an allegory of America, typically naked, because it's kind of the barbarian, the savage, the uncivilized continent. So nakedness was interpreted or could be used as a characteristic of wildness, of barbarity. And what's interesting here, and which is really an almost singular occurrence, is there's also a small allegory of Terra del Fuego, or Feuerland in German, which for some reason was included here as a kind of subaltern part of the American continent.
Yeah. Did they does it almost gives you like a sense of like showing, bare-chested, whether it be women and men, a sense of being uncivilized in a sense?
Yes, I think very often you have examples where Europe and Asia very often dressed as an Ottoman Turk or something like that. Mm-hmm. As these are the civilized continents, while both Africa and America are presented naked or half naked, and with feathers, and they could still be presented as rich and powerful, but there was this quality of but to the Europeans at the time appeared as what they labeled as barbarian or wild. And of course, there was also the association with the tropics and heat, where people go around naked. This was something that kind of exercised the fantasy of the imagination of Europeans.
Yeah.
And they're very imaginative, right?
That's the point. Like, all of this stuff is really coming from, the creation of their minds. Because like you said earlier, a lot of the models or the information that they was getting to formulate these ideas were literally coming from writings. It wasn't like the creators themselves were at these locations to gather information to make these sculptings or these images.
Well, these two images are actually great examples for that. When Abraham Ortelius never had been to America or some other part, he was from Antwerp, but he was, and this is really, the Theatrum Orbis Terrarum is the first collection of maps bound in a book. That's why it's famous, and there were many editions, so many people, so many rich people, princes, and so on had these in their libraries. His allegories are very close to Cesare Ripa's allegories, which we have seen before. The Cesare Ripa's Iconologia was a handbook, and so if you wanted to know how an allegory of whatever, of America or of envy or of biblical teachings should look like, you just opened that book. There were more than 1,000 allegories in there, I think. Artists use these, they had these and they used this all the time. So this was very important.
Right.
And then the other side, sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to ask, was it almost like it was like a Pictionary?
That's it's a good story.
So you just, if you needed a woman who's considered ignorant, like, I can use that one.
Yeah. So, I need an allegory of ignorance, and then there it is.
See,
and sometimes Ripa used kind of antiquity as a model, and sometimes he just made things up because he felt that somebody would need it.
And I think that speaks to what we see, and we're going to show more images soon. But when you go into, I'm thinking the Library of Congress here in DC, right? You go in there and you see the 4 continents represented in statue form, talking about the kids, right? These small figurines, but it's this idea. When you look on the ceiling inside of the actual reading room, the main reading room, you see all of these different allegories there. It's all used as a way to evoke imagination, but also to evoke, in many ways, stereotypes, right? Like what you've been talking about thus far with Africa, with Europe, with Asia, and the Americas. There's this sense of power centralized in Europe and the old world to a larger extent when you add Asia. But then now we have to start looking at how we perceive Africa, how we perceive the Americas, and most importantly, not just how we perceive those 2 continents, but also the people that live in those 2 continents as well. Because you brought up Egypt. Egypt is a representation of African wealth, but in terms of the people, right, we depict them in terms of savagery, right? And talking from the European aspect, savagery of these individuals not having a government, not having a stable understanding of history, not having a this, not having a that. We are already invoking the minds of people who may not go. So the stereotypes are embedded early.
They are, definitely. And they are also contradictory. So that's also amazing sometimes. Yeah.
Excellent. I got a follow-up question. And then Khalil, man, jump right in too. Who were some of the progenitors of this form of artwork, this Baroque style artwork? And mostly, we kind of led into this, but how did churches like the Roman Catholic Church really delve into this form of artwork? Even the Moravian Church, how did they use this artwork as a way to continue this mindset of imagery and understanding of just the known world in general, and then what is left to be discovered?
Yeah, that's a good question, an important question. We already talked a bit about this. So in Renaissance Italy, this kind of these artwork of antiquity is rediscovered and enthusiastically taken up. And of course, you have Rome and the Pope and all these other religious princes who have enormous sums available, and they build palaces and villas and manor houses, and they have the best artists decorating them inside and outside. But for these artworks spreading sort of across the country, and not only in Italy, but for these art forms crossing the Alps and cropping up in Central Europe. For this, there's the reform movement of the Catholic Church is very important, which is kind of often called the post-Tridentinian media offensive after the Council of Trient. This was between 1545 and 1564, so second half 16th century, and the Catholic Church had to deal with Reformation.
Yeah.
They had to say, so we have to turn around many things. And there were a lot of changes in practices and in theological doctrine and so on. And a lot of this was about, bringing coherent Catholic teachings to the masses. Mm-hmm. And there was a recognition that you can do this through art forms, especially through visual communication. And that's actually, this kicks off engagement in the church with media strategies, with the theology of images and so on. And then in the 17th and especially in the 18th century, as European populations grow very rapidly, and older churches have to be renovated, and new monasteries spring up, and new churches have to be built. Suddenly, the Baroque style really conquers the landscape. So really the Baroque really transforms the urban spaces, but also the spaces in the countryside in many ways. And you have these village churches and these palaces, and you've shown pictures here, and they're all marvelously decorated. And the four continents are just one of the many popular motifs that you can find again and again if you're looking for them. So it's also the four directions of the compass. It's the four winds. It's the seven sins, and so on and so on. And the church fathers, and there's a whole range of multiples that are used to decorate rooms.
So Joseph,
four is a very good number if you decorate a room that's rectangular or quadratic.
Right. Yeah. So Joseph, would you say that this is like, almost like modern day TV or social media when we're talking about spreading these ideas and information to the public? Because I think you mentioned before that the Protestant church is just starting to, come into its own, and the populace is used to, the Catholic Church and all its grandeur. So are they in like sort of ways competing in a sense, using the Baroque style to kind of usher in these big ideas and developing these?
I mean, the Baroque Protestants also, so this art form spread to Protestant countries as well. And the big Protestant German princes also have great palaces and so on. And within Protestantism, there's also a kind of an opposition to having images in church rooms and so on. But really and then typically not as lavish as Catholic churches, but they can't immunize themselves against all this exuberance and brightness.
Yeah,
and I mean the Moravians, maybe an interesting example. The Moravian Church is a radical pietist religious community that only starts in the 1720s, in the first half of the 18th century. And their church rooms are relatively simple and unadorned. They have paintings, but still they use paintings, and they have their own range of motifs, so they don't use the four continents, but they also use visual media to transmit their religious idea, to foster a sense of community when they are very active in the mission. So they're sending paintings of brothers and sisters to places in the Caribbean or to Bethlehem in Pennsylvania, just to communicate about their own religious community and their own forms of piety. So everybody does this. Visual communication is very, very well established and very important in 17th and 18th century Europe. And it reaches to the colonies, of course.
Right. So I just want to dive, just not change direction, but really get into some of this stuff. So in your article, right, in More Love Fest and Mass Enslavement in 18th century Moravian Church, you introduced the concept of masked enslavement. How does this concept of like BlackaMoors art fit into that forced labor of African servitude experience in the Americas and in Europe?
Yeah. Well, that's a difficult question insofar as trying to connect two very, very different topics here, but that's very interesting.
Yeah.
When I talked about masked enslavement, I was trying to get at the fact that enslaved people in Europe, whether they are Africans or of African descent, or from southern India, or from the Crimean Peninsula, so lots of slavery systems intersect in Central Europe, also the Mediterranean slavery system, and it's very hard to ascertain whether an individual which you find in the archive was enslaved or was free. To us, slavery is such a significant thing. Think a slave. Wow, yeah. It's so opposed to our idea of a human being's innate freedom. It's a violation of all sorts of human rights, but this just wasn't the case in early modern Europe, unfortunately. And this status of slavery apparently didn't have this significant, at least for the enslavers who were responsible for assembling the archive, for producing the records.
Right.
And therefore I said it's like masked enslavement, because the slavery of an individual, and I was writing about enslaved people brought by the Moravians from the West Indies to Europe, to Germany. It's masked behind other forms of dependency, or it's masked by their function and role in these Moravian congregation settlements. So they're called brothers and sisters, and they are they're wearing the same clothing, they're living in the same houses, they're sleeping in the same halls, like their German brothers and or sisters, which are gender separated. So they're and generally in 17th or 18th century German society, there is no place of slavery like there is in the West Indies. So there is no plantation. There is no job that was only done by slaves. So and there was no job that couldn't be done by slaves. They also served in the military, for example. Yeah? Yeah. So it's really hard to trace slavery or to connect an individual which you find in the archives with a certain status. And I think that's very significant, because it tells us something about how enslavement practices worked outside of this very specific Atlantic slavery context. So Europeans, also early modern Germans, accepted slavery. They said, well, that's perfectly legal. But very often slavery was just a means of, that's my explanation, it was a means of acquiring control, authority over a person, over its workforce. And then this person was employed as a servant and treated like a servant, like all the other servants, for example.
Right.
And the slave status sort of disappears or becomes sleeping until something happens, like a servant wants to leave a household.
Right.
And then maybe there's a court case and somebody says, well, this person just can't go, because I bought this person, she's like a slave or he's like a slave. Very often you have this phrase like, also wie ein Sklave oder als ein Sklave, which kind of shows that this isn't really an established status. Yeah? Servant, also Knecht oder Diener, that's an established status.
Yeah, I think what you. I'm sorry, Lenny. Just
no. You go for it.
No, I was just going to say that I think it's very hard for us to make those two differences because we have such a stamp of chattel slavery here in the West and in America. The concept of a servant or a slave being somewhat part of a family, but yet this person has total control of a person's, whereabouts or the control of their own, not in control of their own destiny. Oftentimes, the only lens that we see slavery or servants is through the eyes of, Western European, whether it be in the Caribbean or whether it be in the United States. So it's a very hard, concept for us to understand. But in order for us to grasp, these concepts in this time, is something that you have to do in history.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm really interested because there is no plantation in early modern Germany or a similar institution. It's really important to look at the practices and to get an understanding of how being enslaved was perceived or not perceived. So sometimes I think even the historical actors were not sure. I mean, there are some cases in the Moravian Church where this can be very clearly shown. And what's even harder is to find out how those people who came as slaves to Europe, how they perceived this personal history. And this is really something where you have to be very lucky to find some statement that kind of can be interpreted in some way or other. So, I mean, I think it's always a good guess to say that it was easier for the Germans to forget about the enslavement of a person, but for this man or woman or child brought from the West Indies, because I mean they would hardly forget this biographical experience, right?
And again, it speaks to not just the inhumane conditions, right, but the devaluing of humanity in that very sense, right? You have people that are, stuck in this position where they cannot leave. I think Khalil spoke to this, where they cannot leave. You have people that are ruling over top of them. And then you have this fight over who belongs and where. Yeah. And then once freedom happens, how do they even get integrated into society, or do they get integrated into society? And in what status do they have after the fact when slavery is over, whether they were freed by their master or, they earned their freedom, through a law that's passed, whatever. How do they integrate into society is just another question upon another question that we over here try to understand from the chattel perspective.
Yeah.
History. So there's a lot there to be explored. And I think this question really is just a follow-up to what you were already talking about with Moore's Love Feast. But by analyzing, symbolic inclusion alongside material exclusion in your book, what broader lessons does your article offer about power, belonging, and inequality? I said a book, I meant to say an article, journal article. But what does it say about power, belonging, and inequality? Both in the historical context and beyond?
Yeah, big question. And I wish I had a ready answer for that. But I think why it is. Let me try to tackle your big question in this way. I think why it is important to study all sorts of forms of enslavement within a context of or within a spectrum of dependencies and coercion and within social hierarchies, not only in Europe, but also in Asian historical societies and wherever, is that we in the so-called Western tradition have this kind of stark dichotomy between free and unfree, slavery and freedom, and I think it is important not only as historians that in historical societies this stark dichotomy did not exist, because there were so many gradations, and all, or for example, European society was extremely paternalistic. It was extremely hierarchical. There were many unfree people. There was no overarching idea of freedom as an innate quality of humanity, and so it is important, I think, first of all, to see that our idea of freedom is not something that existed all the time and it's sort of logical, but is something that has historically evolved, and it has also to be guarded and well understood so that we can guard it and protect it. And I think paying a close look at historical forms of freedom and bondage and coercion may also help us to look more critically at our own societies. So where are the hidden forms of bondage, of coercion in our own Austrian, German, US American societies? Where are the people that are not allowed to fully take part in our system of rights and privileges and so on? This is something that was, at least for me, kind of important. It's something that I had to learn in the progress of my research. That so, well, look at our own times, look at my own place. And my research in this sense has helped me. And I mean, for several years, I've been working at the Bonn Center for Dependency and Slavery Studies. And this was something that was discussed a lot and frequently at this place, because it was this kind of multidisciplinary environment where you have sitting next to an anthropologist from Pakistan who's working on textile producing workers in the textile producing industry today in Pakistan and in Italy and so on. And you have very interesting, we had very interesting conversations going on. And this has also informed my own research that focuses societies that existed 300 years ago.
Yeah. You know, I'm not sure if you're aware, I don't know if we've told you, but our motto is we speak for ourselves, right? That's the motto of the Research Rebels. And one of the things that we typically talk about in that paradigm of speaking for ourselves is starting right where we are, right?
Yeah.
How can we talk about history of other cultures if we are not taking a deeper dive in where we are in this place in 2026, right? In this country, in this locality, wherever we are, right? And we're all over. But where are we in this moment, and how are we looking at history both subjectively and objectively in place and time, and how do we continue to move forward with conversations, right? I think that's a major thing that you hit on. All right, we appreciate it. Yeah, Khalil.
So Joseph, you know, I wanted to tie back to some of these images that we see and get your analysis on it.
Here we go.
Especially this one with Debray, right?
Yeah.
We see, I guess these are the native people at that particular time trying to, I guess, shove a pole inside of an alligator. But I mean, speak about, like, you know, the exaggeration of it. You know what I'm saying? Because obviously this isn't accurate, right? And I wouldn't want anybody to take this as accurate, right? Because even if you look at the alligator, he look like his face is human in some sorts, and his look like he has 5 hands, right? So, you know what I mean? Like, can you speak to that? And again, just to preface it, we talked about the fact that he's getting notes back from, America. He doesn't have a firsthand account. He's not, looking at this on his own and sketching it right there, right then. So can you speak to that process, speak to that style of how we get to this point to where we, people are looking at this?
Yeah, I just couldn't resist.
I can't
No, before we talked about Abraham Ortelius, Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, and how he used these allegories without, and they're so stereotypically, they're taken out of Cesare Ripa's Iconologia. And then I selected Theodore de Brie's image illustrations because they're kind of a contrasting example. So Theodore de Brie, he also didn't go to Florida in this case, but he worked very closely with people who had been there. And he was illustrating, he produced these wonderful collections of travel reports. And in this case, this is from a report on French colonization attempts in Florida in the 16th century. Nothing came of it. But there was an artist there, a French artist, what was his name? Jacques Lemoine. And he produced a lot of wonderful drawings or paintings. And then Theodore de Brie used these paintings and made engravings. And he also used this in the frontispiece. We've seen it before, side by side with the Abraham Ortelius frontispiece. And there you see that in certain contexts, especially in the map making, travel report context, you have artists that had access to very accurate information, and they were trying to reproduce what the witnesses, the colonizers, saw. And there, because of that, you have these Florida Native Americans with headdresses that were probably what they had at the time. We have a slightly exaggerated image of an alligator. So this is about alligator hunts. And yeah, I just selected these images because they show that some artists had access to anthropological information, if you want. And some of these images also kind of lived on and later entered into the canon of allegories. And here you're showing another example. Should I just go on, or do you want to ask it? Okay, so this is quite famous.
Go on, yeah, please do.
Now, this is a famous part of a series by Hans Burgkmair. And this is an illustration of a triumphal procession of Emperor Maximilian that never took place, so it's a virtual procession. And it's, of course, all designed to show how great the emperor is. Hans Burgkmair included people from foreign parts of the world, and he used earlier images he made for a travel report to India and East India, and introduced these foreign people from faraway places into this triumphal procession as a kind of an illustration of how far the influence and magnificence of this German emperor or German king, emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, was reaching. And it just is an example for this transfer of images, how these images were moving from one context to the next, sometimes losing things while adding others. And in the end, you can end up with something pretty fantastic.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Joseph, because that's something that I noticed, because it seems like, you know, he's borrowing from some reports and adding to others, because particularly in some cases, like you see with the feather skirt and the feather within the crowns.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really accurate. Like you see him using like maybe reports from the South America, and then applying those same attributes to other indigenous people elsewhere. So it's not, you know, it's kind of like a compilation of things, not necessarily
it's
accurate.
like copy paste that's going on.
Yeah, like copy paste, exactly.
Yeah, and this is a very good example. That's a really early illustration by Johann Froschauer. It was created in 1505 in Augsburg. So America was still recent news at the time. And this was used to illustrate the letter by Amerigo Vespucci. And this is also an example of this media revolution. So in 1505, printers in Augsburg were serial producing broadsheets containing the Amerigo Vespucci letter. And I think, and Amerigo Vespucci didn't provide an illustration. So Froschauer is trying to make sense of what he's reading. But I think this is such a great example because his image had such an afterlife. And for 300 years, you will see these feather crowns and these feather skirts.
Yeah.
Probably nobody in Brazil has ever
exactly. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's really images speak louder than words, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times you'll see these allegories being used over and over and copy and paste, and no one not really understanding that this is not accurate in no form or fashion. In no form or fashion. Okay.
So what we're talking about, we're talking about composites, right? And you'll see more. You'll see more as we move through it. But we're talking about things where you have secondhand information being put into art, which turns into more secondhand information, and then letting those people describe and drive a culture that they do not understand fully. They don't even understand. I shouldn't even say fully. They have no understanding of what's going on the ground. They haven't gotten there.
Yeah, but I mean the image you're showing now, which is the first fruits painting, a painting that was created in the Moravian church, is exactly the opposite, because here you see first-hand information.
Yeah.
This painting was created to show the so-called first fruits. The Moravians thought that these were the first in different nations that were kind of touched by the Moravian message about Christ and the Savior. And I've selected this image because it shows several individuals who were actually brought to Germany and lived in the Moravian congregation settlements in Germany. So here they are shown surrounding Christ. So this is kind of an eschatological message. But for example, the two young boys with these white bright uniforms, they were living in Marienborn and Herrnhaag. And the man standing behind them, he was from St. Thomas in US Virgin Islands today. And he died all three of them died in Germany, and they are buried on Moravian God's acres. So you can still visit their graves. So this is this peculiar Moravian message of a world united in faith and what their mission is trying to achieve. And it's also a great example of visual communication, of course.
I'm over here in shock. You can't see me right now, but I'm over here in shock because you said I was looking at that picture earlier, and how I see it, right, based on someone who doesn't have an understanding or didn't have an understanding of the Moravian church, I saw it as this form of colonization as well, right? And you please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the ability of the church to expand its religion to the masses of different people who would typically not be included in Europe at this time until the church gets involved. Am I correct in saying that, or is there, please clear up any misconceptions?
I'm not sure. Could you repeat or rephrase?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I'm looking at this. I'm looking at this picture, and I'm seeing all of these different groups of people. I see, I see what appears to be African individuals that are in this picture.
Yeah,
it looks like I see some indigenous individuals as well in this picture. And what I'm seeing, you said that these people were brought back and they lived in congregations.
Some of them, yeah.
Okay, all of them. And so would you say that this is an example of colonization brought on by the church, like you having the church being used?
I get you now. Okay, now, so there are so many aspects to this painting. Some of these people, like I said, these two boys, for example, they were actually living in Germany. They were bought as slaves by Moravian missionaries and sent to Germany. Others never left. They were just the so-called first fruits, the first to be in contact with the missionaries and the first to be converted. For example, you see an Inuit man from Greenland on the left side. And there's on the very left side, the man with the red turban. He was also living in Germany. He probably came from what is Georgia today, so in the Caucasus region, Black Sea region. And several were Native Americans. And sometimes the artist had a very good idea of what these people looked like. So these are actual portraits. And other people, those who never came to Germany, he never met. So Johann Valentin Haidt, the artist, was a German. He died in Pennsylvania, in Bethlehem, but he never made it to Greenland, for example. And on the right side of Christ, there is a Native American young man with a feather crown and a feather shirt. And this should be a Native American from Suriname or Florida, I'm not sure. And here you see, and that's very funny, the artist had no idea what Native Americans there were wearing. He had no idea of the national costume. And so he reverted to the frost shower example of the feather crown.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say.
I'm like, very accurate information next to an almost allegorical.
That's why I asked that question about colonization.
It's all in one image.
Right. Oh my goodness.
Get you a feather crown and a feather skirt. Like, that's it.
And then you see this half-naked African woman, and that's also an interesting story. Her name was Hannah, and she too, she died shortly before this painting was finished, and she lived in the same place as the artist at the time. So he knew her. They were both members of the congregation. And I'm very sure that never, ever in Germany, she walked around in this way. So she would be dressed like the woman next to her as a Moravian sister, everything covered, also the head. But suddenly, in the moment of her death, or after the moment of her death, the artist, and maybe also Count Zinzendorf, who commissioned the painting, decided to paint her like an allegory of Africa, like she was just, stepping off the coast or something like that. And it's a totally made up vision of her.
Wow.
Yeah. So, it seems like
it's very contradictory, and I didn't explain why they did it this way, but it's just amazing.
Yeah.
And slightly frightening.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like, like you were saying before, it kind of sticks to the already established script right? When we talked about being unclothed, as opposed to what they were actually wearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, after her death, she suddenly became you could say she became a representative of the kind of Africans,
Yeah.
that the stereotypical Africans as 18th century Germans imagined them. So that's probably the explanation for why she appears in this painting in the way she does. But still, it's a very telling decision the artist and the patron made here.
Right. Again, this is the Four Continents. Imagine that we already went over.
Yeah.
Right. So now we're pretty much talking about going earlier on. We're talking about the idea of the transatlantic slave trade and some of the ads and things. So we're actually looking at this point, some of the carryovers of those same ideas being portrayed in ads. Yep. So are you familiar? I know you're familiar with this type of artistry.
Yes.
Again, like you said, we see the feather headdress along with the feather skirts, as well as the smoking pipe. That would be tobacco.
Yeah.
And the ad literally says Rolls, Leaf, Virginia in White's Alley, Chancery Lane, London.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you see, I think it's a document that showcases the power of these visual conventions, because at the time, both in Virginia and of course in Virginia, but also in London, there were so many people who actually had an idea what Native Americans and especially Africans look like. Because I mean, there were Africans, a sizable community living. I don't know exactly from which time this ad is, but late 17th, early 18th century would be my guess. So they were actually in contact with people from both continents. But for visual communication, they decided to, it probably wasn't even a conscious decision. Everybody reverted to these visual conventions that are also present in the continent allegories.
Khalil, did you see that I moved up one of those pictures?
No, you want to go like this one?
No, not that one. Mm-hmm. There should be one afterwards. No, not that one either. If you hit refresh.
Hold on a second.
Okay. There's this one image. The reason why I want to show this one image, and it connects to what we've already talked about. There's a huge statue that is located in the Virginia History Museum, the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, that's located in Richmond, Virginia. And there's this huge, just this huge statue of an Indian that is there, and it's we know it as a composite. I just wanted you to just see that image and relate it to what we already have seen here. It's on slide 17, Khalil.
All right, it won't let me refresh, but
okay,
I'll get to it.
It's fine. Yeah, and but it's there. I just wanted you to see it and speak to it, and I'm sure we'll get to it at some point in here. Yeah, if you keep going, it should be in there later then. But there is this just a huge. There we go. That's it. Yeah. Sorry about that, Khalil. So, but that's the picture that I'm talking about. Believe it or not, back home, there are people who believe that this is like a representation, and there's a whole explanation written down there. But they believe that this is what the actual Native Americans look like. They believe that they were Black individuals that had this, the feathered headdress and the feathered skirts on, right? Can you speak to how they're taking both Africa and the Americas and smashing this idea together And I think it's based on what you've already seen with the tobacco Indians. This is, for those of you who don't know, this is a cigar store Indian. That is what we see.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. So yeah, I mean these cigar store Indians, and in Germany and Austria would also have the so-called coffee house Moors, which were actually depictions of Africans, or imagined stereotypes of Africans. So these are kind ubiquitous, I think, and yeah, they're all using these visual stereotypes and attributes and characteristics that were developed in the early modern period, and they live on and on almost until today, I guess. So this has a lot to do with so there's never an ethnographical interest here. There's always the need to reproduce an easily recognizable icon. Yeah, I think that captures it best. It's all about visual communication in the most efficient, and doing it in the most efficient way.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's it almost, we talk about it a lot. It's almost like a minstrel mascot.
Yeah,
so to speak. It's like a minstrel mascot. I give Colonial the credit on that. It's like we talk about this off. This is a minstrel mascot. This is something that is used to depict the stereotypes, but also being used as a way to brand, right? You're branding tobacco, you're branding cigars. Ah, man.
I mean, it's like on this one particularly, I mean, I don't even know if people know, like the skirt that he has on, I mean, that's tobacco leaf.
Yeah. It looks almost like a feather dress, but it's
actually tobacco.
Kind of, again, you have this kind of copy paste and changing some details, making it fit to your purpose.
I call it, we jokingly call it medieval. We call it medieval minstrel. In I know it's like, it's kind of a play on words, but and then often
that's interesting.
We also show sort of the same kind of symbolism in crest and also in coat of arms. This in particular is, if I'm not mistaken, the Pope's coat of arms.
Yeah, it was the personal coat of arms of Benedict XVI.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good example of how things live on. I mean, of course, coat of arms are kind of a very conservative branch of the arts.
Yes.
But this is, you see here, a so-called Mohrenkopf in German. Moor is a term in German that slightly different from the English. Moor was used to refer to everyone who was perceived to be dark-skinned in the Middle Ages and in the early modern period. It's a very archaic term today. It could also bear a connection to Islam, and I think especially these heads on a coat of arms often have that connection, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, this is from the coat of arms of the town of Freising, which is the Bavarian town where the Pope came from.
Mm-hmm.
And the bear is, this is kind of an let me see, I noted this down somewhere because I had to look it up. It is a biblical, a saint, a story about a saint who is, his horse or his ass breaks down, and then suddenly a bear comes and carries his baggage. So that's this story.
Yeah, because I've seen the little,
and then the pilgrim's scallop, of course.
Yeah. So what's the representation of the shell?
That's the pilgrim's scallop, because pilgrims in the early modern period, they used this as a sign because they used the scallop to scoop up water. This was kind of their water vessel, their drinking cup. And it was also put on their heads, and it was reproduced in gold and silver and copper. And that was the universal sign of the pilgrim.
Okay, this one right here is another common one we see. And this is, correct me if I'm wrong, Khalil, this is the flag of Corsica.
Yeah.
Flag of Corsica.
Sardinia, yeah. Well, Sardinia has the 4 ones, but yeah.
Yeah. So can you break this down for us, Joseph?
Well, I'm not really an expert on the Corsican flag, but this is a motif which you find throughout the Mediterranean region. It goes back to this constant conflict and raiding and counter-raiding across the coastal areas of the Mediterranean. And of course, Corsica and Sardinia and Sicily, they were all, and southern Italy, they were all involved. And this is like the North African raider who was the enemy of the, who came by ship and raided the coastal villages and so on. Yeah. So I assume that's the reference here.
Right. I think when we see this again spread on social media, people assume that they see this picture of this person on this flag, and they assume that it's representative of the people who are there, right? It's representing the people who were already there. The real Sardinians, when in fact these are people that have been raided. Again, go back to minstrel mascots, right? That's what we're seeing. Same thing over here with the crest of John Smith, right?
Yeah.
Whole story behind that too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It kind of connects to my own to my own research area now, which is a kind of captivity and slavery in connection with the Ottoman Empire and the Habsburg Empire.
Yeah.
And I really had to look this up. John Smith had a very interesting life. Before he came to Virginia and so on, he served in Hungary and then in the borderlands between the Habsburg Empire and the Ottoman Empire, and he fought there. And he allegedly received this coat of arms, or he was knighted by the Prince of Transylvania, Sigismund Bathory. So you have a Transylvanian connection here.
Wow. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
No.
And I mean, these three Turkish heads, or three Turks' heads, as they are called, the Türkenköpfe in German. This is also popular. So for this era. So because he was a soldier, parent in the wars against the Ottoman Turks, and this is sort of recognized on this shield. And the lopped off heads of Muslim enemies were exhibited. So there's also a kind of very cruel background to this. Yeah. So I don't actually know where this is from. So this seems to be a fence or something. I can talk about this one if you would. Yeah. Do you still hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, okay. So this is let me see, a sculpture on a so-called Mohrenbrunnen, a Moors fountain in a German city, and that's kind of you find this in many places in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. Sometimes, in some cases, they exist even today. They were using so-called Mohren as figurines, and the message, of course, depends on context. Here, as far as I could find out, there was a sculpture taken from another context and put on this fountainhead, and this was one of the three kings or the three magi. In European art, one of the three magi is usually portrayed as depicted as an African, and this also explains this kind of golden vessel he is holding. So this would be where the myrrh or incense would be, which he intended to present to the Jesus child, the small child in Bethlehem.
Yeah. Oftentimes, let me ask you something, Joseph. Oftentimes, I can't tell, like, as far as representation is concerned, the difference between, the Magi or Saint Maurice is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did they incorporate Saint Maurice into the third Magi, or
no? So the three Magi are called Caspar, Melchior, and Balthasar.
Okay.
And yeah, kind of the African one changes, so you can't say it's Balthasar or Melchior as far as I know, so or Caspar. But Saint Maurice is another figure, so another myth about the saint who, a soldier allegedly a soldier in the Theban Legion, which was an old Christian formation in the allegedly in the Roman Empire. And here you have two examples of Saint Maurice. Yeah. The one is from, I think the one on the right is from Riga. That would be the house of a merchant guild who were called Schwarzhäupter, the blackheads. And they had kind of Saint Maurice as a patron.
Right.
And the other one is Saint Maurice at the town hall of Coburg, I think, and both so this is from the 16th century, and the other one probably too. I'm not so sure, but yeah, early modern period. And he's depicted as a knight in both cases because they thought he was a soldier, a Roman soldier, an officer actually, Roman officer. Yeah.
Right.
And so he carries a shield and the lance and so on. Yeah.
But was it? He was a fictitious character. He's not really a accurate real person in history, was he?
I have no idea. Yeah. I don't think so. Yeah, it's mythology. They might very well have been a person.
Right.
But yeah, whether this man was from Africa or whether it's several historical actors that kind of became amalgamated into this one mythological character. So you would have to ask a theologian. I really don't know. Yeah.
All right.
But it's a popular figure.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize these two sculptures.
Yeah, I think I forgot what that one is.
Yeah. Okay, that's a rower, a gondoliere, from a famous painting by Vittore Carpaccio. So this is a huge painting showing kind of a miracle at the Rialto Bridge, so still very famous today, the bridge. But it's a great example of the presence of African. We don't know if this is an African person. It could be somebody from southern India as well, clearly as a sort of prestigious servant who's rowing his master across the canale. There were in ancient in early modern Italy, and especially in places like Venice, you would see many such servants from
Yeah, I'm glad
India or all sorts of regions from the Mediterranean, from the African coast of the Mediterranean and so on, coming through they arrived there through the trans-Saharan slave trade and so on. So this was huge. I think there are estimations for the Mediterranean slave trade that 7 to 8 million people were involved in the whole Mediterranean basin in the early modern period.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the fact that there were also people from India in the region at that particular time, because like you said, sometimes when you just look at these images, we automatically assume that these are people from Africa, but because they're dark skinned, we understand that there was also a population from the continent of India there also.
A whole bunch of different, like, again, just representation of individuals of various different shades, right? But found in different areas throughout the world, in terms of Africa and Asia, especially. There's so many, more images like this one, for example, right?
Yeah, they're like,
I'm seeing this picture and I'm just curious to see how you're interpreting this, but what are we seeing here? Like what is this possibly depicting?
Well, on the left side, this is a Dutch woman, Margaretha van Reephurst. This is from the late 17th century, and she was the wife of Cornelis Tromp, who was a kind of a Dutch admiral. She was a representative of the Dutch upper class in the 17th century, very, very rich patricians. And she's like the lady next to her, which is the Madame de Kerouaille, who was the Duchess of Portsmouth, and I think the lover of Charles II of England, something like that. They are both presented here in a very typical manner, together with black servants or black child servants. And this is really, you find this throughout the 17th and 18th century. There are even earlier antecedents, and there are also later examples. But it's really very, very popular in the 17th and 18th century. And I think what is so telling about the history, how these paintings were interpreted, is that for a long time, there was this idea that these black servants very likely were fictitious. They were not real persons, because slavery didn't reach into Europe. It was a matter of the colonies. And there are so many such examples from Germany, which really had no kind of direct connections, in the sense that they had their own colonies, or only very short-lived ones. So, and nowadays we know that, well, these were actually servants that existed. These were real persons, and in a very few cases, their fates and their lives could be reconstructed. And they are kind of, to us now, they can be representatives of this harsh reality that the slave trade really reached into the heart of Europe, and even beyond Western Europe, so into Central Europe.
It seems like what we're seeing here are several things here. Number one, based on these two pictures alone, right? But we can go through all the ones we've just
there are hundreds and hundreds of such paintings.
Right. These are decorative schemes, right? Where you have it set up where there's clearly this form of elegance that's supposed to be represented by Europe. And then, of course, people that are subjected under European rule, hence the chamber moors that we see here, right?
Yeah.
But then we also have like this sick, twisted fantasy being put out as accurate depictions of people's lives that individuals don't really know about. They're making these things up on about individuals.
Yeah. I mean, this is a matter of representative art. It shows kind of the tastes, the cosmopolitan attitude, and the wealth and the power of these people, as of these European women in this case. It tells us how these the black children, probably very likely taken from the West Indies or directly from Africa, how they were perceived as a kind of symbols, status symbols. It tells us very little about the actual lives of these children. You cannot, very often people tend to infer from these paintings that these servants had comfortable lives, because it's not the plantation, right?
Right.
But you can't really infer from such a painting how these children were treated, if they were kind of just given up on and put on the street when they were growing. We don't know whether they were isolated or well integrated into the household. And this can't evidence that we have points, at least shows that all of this is possible. So such people could end up destitute. Such people sometimes married and kind of could lead a life in relative comfort, but it's not something you can take for granted.
Yeah,
many of them died very young because of tuberculosis and European illnesses.
Can you? Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you speak to? A lot of times we see these images and then we see the presence that they may have on, clothes and very expensive clothes and dresses, or they might be wearing like pearl necklaces or pearl earring. Can you speak to that point in the sense that somehow in that particular time period it was kind of vogue to dress up your slave in the sense of like a status symbol?
Yeah, I mean, every servant, your servants, so if you're an aristocrat in Europe in the 17th century, your servants are also a medium of representation. You use them to show your wealth. They are all dressed very fine. And I mean, if you have a lot of money, you buy a child slave, but you probably also have a hajduk, which could be a Turkish captive who is a strong guy who's dressed up in Ottoman or Hungarian costume and who's kind of riding with you and in your carriage and protects you. You would have runners, you would have kind of a host of liveried servants who are just there to greet your guests or to serve food at the table. So all these serving people are used to communicate about your status, about your wealth. And black servants, whether they were from the West Indies or directly from Africa or from southern India, they were all kind of, they were kind of among the most prized for this sort of things, for their representational value. Yeah. And this also explains in a way these statuettes by Balthasar Perlmoser. So this is kind of the same intent behind these artworks.
This is the one. We told you about this one. This is the showpiece that everyone likes to put on there. In fact, there are people again that we communicate with on social media who believes that this is a great representation of black people in America pre-Columbus, or it also focuses on Black people ruling Europe, because look at all the wealth that's here. Joseph, please, can you go over this picture so we can just finally put this one to rest?
If I had known that before. Yeah. No, this statue is now in the Green Vault in Dresden. I think it's on display, I'm not sure. It was produced by Balthasar Perlmoser, a very active 18th century artist. So you also in Vienna, you can find statues made by him. And I think these were produced for the Saxon king, I guess. yeah, but this is just part of this almost fashion to have what the Germans called Mohren, African stereotypical representation of Africans showing off your wealth. So these are just here. This figure is just here to carry the expensive gemstones belonging to the Saxon king, and in a way, he's also like these allegories of Africa or America. He represents the wealth of another continent, the wealth that's also manifest in these gemstones that were mined, I don't know where. So this is a very fanciful, posh display of the gemstone collection of the, or part of the gemstone collection of the Saxon king, who was one of the most, so I don't know which one was commissioned this artworks really, but there were several Saxon, also the Prince Electors of Saxony and August II, August the Strong, he was the also the King of Poland. And he was a very ostentatious Baroque monarch. So at that time, Saxony was not a kingdom. Got carried away here.
No, you're fine. No, you're good. I have a question to ask you, just real quick. And this has to do with just vocabulary that we see in the past, right?
Yeah.
Khalil, I think you may know what I'm about to set up here. Swarthy, tawny, dub. When we see these terms and we're using this, are these racial terms, or are we talking about in what sense are these terms used when it comes to classifying people? Are we talking about the race? Are we talking about people's hair complexion? These old European style words that typically get thrown around in literature.
Yeah, well, that's really tricky, and I'm really grappling with this, and I think it's important to kind of engage with these semantics, because you can't just look at how these terms might be used today and then project that use back 300 years or longer. Of course, and it's sometimes hard for me to talk about this in English, because I have the impression that, especially in the United States, the term race is used in a very different way. So in German, nowadays, you wouldn't really use the word Rasse, because it's tainted by National Socialism. Mm-hmm. So it's not something that the government wouldn't ask you, which race are you?
Right.
Would ask about your nationality or maybe about your religious beliefs, but yeah, not your race. So so there's it's not easy to translate these terms for me. Yeah, but still, the thing is, in 17th or 18th, early 18th century Germans, for example, were not interested really in a kind of natural science sense of racial categories. They were thinking of, let's say, the most important distinction was between Christians and quote unquote heathens. So there was the Christian part of the world, which was Europe, and the rest, and these were the heathens, and they had to be converted, and eventually they had this very clear idea of world history and how it would end. It would end when the world would be united in one belief, and the Savior would rule. And well, we had debates between pre-millenarists and post-millenarists, but the outcome of world history was very clear to early modern Christian Europeans. And from this, their categories are flowing, I think. So if they're talking about Mohren in the 17th or 18th century, they're thinking about heathen people who are dark-skinned. Now, this doesn't mean that they didn't have, that the category or term like Moor wasn't connected to some sort of bias. And this was also kind of, there was this idea that the Black people were cursed. This would be the curse of Ham in the Old Testament. And this was also sometimes used to legitimize slavery. but it was only one of the arguments put forward to defend enslavement. And yeah, there was sometimes this idea that heathendom, being a heathen, had some innate qualities. So while early modern Europeans didn't have didn't have a scientific racism, and didn't use the term race in the sense that it was later used in the 19th or in the 20th century, they had this strong idea that many qualities in a person would be hereditary. So, and you have to remember that these are hierarchical societies that are ruled by nobility, and all the good qualities are sort of transferred by blood.
Right.
Especially in the Iberian societies, this is a very the limpieza del sangre, the purity of blood. This is a concept that would be very familiar to all early modern Europeans, and this also informs how they view heathen people. You find evidence in sources where people kind of make offhand remarks about heathens or Moors, and then you realize, well, they think they have kind of this innate deficiency, that heathendom is kind of something that's inborn.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not logical, and it's not rational, and it's not easy to categorize, and it's all like all of these biases and prejudices, they are stupid and contradictory, but this is something that's there. And I think it's important to research this, because a lot of these assumptions and ideas kind of make their way into scientific racism. Inform how late 18th century scientists start to look at human bodies, and they inform the reasons why they start to dissect people from Africa or other parts of the world and suddenly look at skulls and stuff like that. And they don't reflect that. They think they are rational and enlightened, but all these old religious ideas, I think they have their life goes on in these new scientific views of the world and humanity, and the new categories and hierarchies that are being developed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right in alignment with you. One of the things I also wanted you to touch on too, as far as in that same idea, is that socially, right, people in nobility have the idea that the lighter they are, right, or staying inside, or not going outside, in the sense that people who are dark skinned or who are dark are really or people who work outside, or people who are laborers. So this whole concept of the nobility, like the lighter you are, whether it be putting on powder or whether you see it in paintings, the contrast between someone who's light and bright as opposed to someone who's dark and has a tan, symbolizes that they work outside, they're in the field, and they're other.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research on that, and it's notoriously difficult to research how, kind of the emotion of colors. Mm-hmm. And skin colors and so on. But I mean, there is evidence there's clear evidence that Black often was associated with negative qualities.
Right.
And one of them you have just elucidated, if you wanted to have this white, almost translucent skin.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a sign of status. But there are also many other contexts where the dark skin color could be construed as negative. It was also used in conjunction with the Roma and Sinti, and they're clearly not from Africa, but they were perceived as dark skinned.
Yeah.
But in other contexts, it didn't play a role. So you really, in research, in historical research, you always really have to look at the specific context. And there are cases where, you could say, class beats race.
Yeah.
Where people are recognized as nobility, African nobility, Native American nobility, whatever, and then they are treated as such.
Yes.
And also, people who, for whatever reason, I mean, there's this idea that maybe Alessandro de' Medici had a mother who was of African descent. He was called Il Moro. Of course, he was a Medici, and he was, in that case, class was clearly more important.
Yeah. I think because we live in a Western society, we often see color as a primary identifier. But a lot of us make the mistake of looking at the history and the past in that lens, not knowing in different time periods and in different places that there were other attributes that were primary, as opposed to always looking at everything through a color lens.
Yeah, there were more in early modern Europe, at least. There were certainly, it was more heterogeneous. There were many overlapping or intersecting hierarchies and between human beings, and they sometimes kind of intersect in very to us surprising ways.
I know that Khalil's putting up these maps here. There's one map that we've seen. I don't know if that's the map that you have in front of you, Khalil, for America, but we've seen a map that has like the Indian composites and stuff that's there. And they're leaning on the name, and it says T apostrophe Americans, right? Do you know what that is actually saying in English?
I couldn't enlarge it, but I'm looking on my own.
And I can put it in the chat for you. It's written this way. And yeah, what is that saying?
Yeah, I'm looking for the map now.
You're looking for the map now? Okay.
I don't know if we have it though.
Okay, dang.
I don't know whether it could be Dutch or a strange form of Dutch. I have no idea.
He said it's strange.
But it could be kind of a reference to the two Americas, North and South America.
Okay.
No idea. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
No, I don't think we got it.
We don't have it? Dang. That's right.
I mean, I'll look this up. So, I mean, there should be something somewhere.
Let me see if I can find it.
Because it's a very common map that we often see. Is this one? Nope. That's not. Oh yeah, here we go. I'm gonna put, I found it. So I'm gonna put it on here. If you can, I was gonna say, can I put it on one of the slides real quick?
Yeah.
All right.
No, I can't. Well, I won't be able to update the slide. You want to just put it in the thing and then I'll put it up?
Yeah, sure.
In the back? Not in the back, but on the stage.
On the stage, yeah. Let's see. Can I let's see. Do I need to just put the link in there for you in the chat?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll do that.
Perfect. Here we go. Let's do this. So you will see it. It's a lot. Just got hit with a long hyperlink there, brother. I'm sorry. But if you click on that and then you draw it in, it's the map of Florida. It's a map of Florida. So if you zoom in,
give me one second.
See it written there.
Give me 1 second.
Yeah. And first of all, for those of you out there listening, thank you so much. Thank you for continuing to listen. Josef, this has been great. And I know we've been taking up a lot of your time, but we had a lot of questions because we battle a lot of misconception. And so we're glad that you're here to spend some of your time with us today to do this work. But yeah, this is a very important map because it's one that, again, we grapple with often.
Okay. Yeah, I have it before me now, and it says the Amerikaans geweest van Florida. So this clearly is Dutch. So yeah, this should be about the. So it says these are the Americans in Florida, something like that. So because it seems to illustrate a lot of Native American towns.
Wow.
I'm not so I didn't know this map. It's really fascinating.
And as you can see the motifs there added onto the map of what appears to be indigenous. We can only assume indigenous people being met by colonists over there to the left.
Yeah.
And
yeah, you have to probably Dutchmen or Spaniards, I don't know, 17th century costume. And then you have these Native Americans who really, again, who have these stereotypical feather headdresses. They're not taking from the travel reports of Jacques Lemoyne, who was there and painted Native Americans, but they're just, kind of this stereotypical Native American warriors. And it's also interesting that there's this group of, I don't know, are these captives who are carrying goods guarded by an armed European?
Oh, you're talking about the ones behind, right?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying. Yeah. They look like they're carrying. I don't know what that is. Might be sugar. Might be anything.
Yeah.
Carrying that raw wealth away. That's what's
But I mean, it symbolizes extraction, right? That's what we're talking about. Extraction of resources from one land to the other.
Yeah.
Which you again, kind of showed. Symbol of the emerald.
I've just seen below that there's this kind of red frame, and there it's that says it's about Ferdinand de Soto. So this is a map illustrating the expedition of Ferdinand de Soto, apparently. So this early Spanish conquistador. Yep. And now it makes sense that you have this group of Native Americans that were forced into kind of carrying provisions and so on for the Spaniards. Now, okay, that's an interesting map. I've just noted down the maker, Peter van der Aar.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, so this is a Dutchman providing information on what the Spaniards, their enemies, are up to.
Wow. You believe it or not, Joseph, believe it or not, we're trying to end all of this. Believe it or not, that map that you're seeing right there, there's a social media movement, fervor, however you want to say it, that this map is essentially saying that this land was called Taimari, right? And that Taimari was the place where these individuals who were the first Indians who happened to be Black, I kid you not, that happened to be Black people already here pre-Columbus. I know we don't want to jump into that direction. We're not going to, but the whole idea is that they don't realize that the T in this Dutch word is basically saying the Americas. And so instead they've made up a whole nation.
Language.
Make believe that this whole world is called Taimari. I know it sounds strange, but this is the misinformation that we're fighting, and it's real misinformation because it is already again seeping into the homes of people with young individuals. I just don't want people to be misled. As a teacher, I don't want to see people misled.
That's I'm dumbfounded.
Yeah, me too.
So are we a lot of times.
I mean, I didn't know that map before. It's not really my area of expertise, but I mean, there's there's so much information on all this early modern, especially Dutch map making industry. So it shouldn't be hard to find the information on the very specific information on for which regions and by whom and yeah, this map was produced.
Wow.
But I mean, this fact which you see very often, that Native Americans are shown as very dark-skinned, this is something that you also find in the continent allegories sometimes. And you just realize that Europeans at the time apparently had a very, very unspecific idea of what constituted dark skin. And some artists had apparently next to no idea what people looked like, actually. They were using with their prints as kind of models. And these prints often weren't colored. So a dark skin was just a characteristic of people living in foreign parts and being heathen. So there isn't too much to it, I'm afraid.
Yep. No. Believe it or not, Joseph, there's a lot to what you just said. You have no idea. There's a lot to what you just said, because we've been trying to explain this as well when we look at the old maps, when we look at the old documents, not unlike the Ethiopians. All of this understanding of what these Europeans were talking about, these explorers, I think is very important that we understand. And for those of us in the audience, those of you in the audience, that these Europeans, and Khalil and I, we talk about this all the time, these individuals were not anthropologists.
No.
Anthropologists, these are not geneticists, these are not genealogists. These were men who were going out exploring, some of them young guys, right, that are going out on these voyages, and they're describing these people that they have never seen in some kind of way that would get the reader or whomever that's going to pick up their journal to put it into imagination or confines of what they already know back home. So this is not, you have no idea that you just shook the ground with what you just said.
Hold on. Don't forget the point that they were drunk. I don't want to add.
Yes.
I want to add. They had a couple on the way.
That explains a lot. No, I mean, one of the examples I selected is actually quite shows this quite well. These are these allegories from the Heis Palace in Augsburg. We had them up in the beginning. Maybe we could go to them. It was Augsburg Palais Heis. That's the name I gave them. Can you find them? It's these corners of a ceiling fresco.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Let me see. Yeah, I know which ones you're talking about. Oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I had it earlier. Here we go. These ones, right?
No. Okay.
Nah, I keep going forward. I think I know exactly which one.
Oh, yeah. Nah, these. I love these.
No, I mean, that's great. This image is usually interpreted as showing America. I mean, you see these two dark-skinned people below the marble allegory. And there are parrots and stuff and lots of riches. And then there is the image of Africa. Maybe we could jump to Africa. Or what is usually interpreted as Africa. Oh, where is she? There. No, that's Europe, I guess. Yes. No, that's.
Isn't that Africa and Asia, right? No, Africa and America.
No, but there's another one. There must be another one. Or did you put up only two of these?
No, I put up.
Yeah,
we put up all three. Did we not? Did we not have three of them up there?
Hold on, let me see. It's this one, which is.
There's also one with an elephant.
Yeah. There it is.
Yeah. And this is usually interpreted as Africa, but
right.
actually, it's impossible to decide. I mean,
Right.
both Africa and America are portrayed as kind of, again, these naked, rather barbarian figures. The elephant is a typical attribute of Africa. For obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But again, if you look at these two persons sitting here, they are much lighter skinned than the one in the America allegory.
Absolutely.
So, and the artist just didn't care. They wanted to produce something fascinating, something exotic. The message was clear, so it was the whole world united in 4 parts. So this
they're not interested.
There was no anthropological interest.
Yeah, they're not interested in whether he's 2 shades black or 3 shades black. They're not. It's interesting. Wow.
It's unbelievable. I'm just flabbergasted. I'm doing research over here actually as we're talking. Like I'm just looking up more. Like it's just, oh my goodness.
And there are other examples of this where it's really, it's usually easy to distinguish Europe and Asia, but Africa and America are sometimes very hard to, or it's impossible to really distinguish them. So because the attributes are sort of mixed up and yeah.
So this one is interesting, right? Because clearly this one is Europe, right? She's on a horse. Yes. And then one of the things that we wanted to point out to show like how you was talking about before, as far as the hierarchy is concerned, we see her holding an orb in one hand, right? And the scepter in the other.
Yep.
Right. And then we could see that same hierarchy played out in Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And King Charles.
And then the current king, right? He has the orb, which signifies world dominance, and the scepter or the rod from which he rules also, right? Disseminating justice. And some, talking about allegory here, y'all.
Yeah, I mean, this scepter and this orb, they really go back very long. So I think even to the late Roman period, and the orbiculus, the orbiculum, this orb is kind of of course, a symbol of the globe, and shows kind of that they, especially in the case of the emperor, empress, that they were kind of. They claimed world dominance. And it was eventually adopted by all European monarchs. But this is exactly what you see in this engraving by Goetz, which probably is inspired by representation of the Empress Maria Theresia, who was often shown. There are several paintings that show her on horseback. So you have kind of a real monarch and an allegory mashing. It would be easily recognizable to contemporaries of the artist, of course.
It's just unbelievable. And just the time, like just of going through all of these pictures, and trust me, I would love to be able to, we would love to be able to talk to you more outside of this space. I know we only had about a short period of time, but Josef, this has been fantastic for several reasons. Number one, clearing up a lot of the misconceptions. Number two, bringing us new knowledge to think about. And most of all, number three, putting this back into our historical context of looking at the future, looking at the present, how it plays a role in the future, but looking back to the past to see how we've repeated these chains. We're going to be doing a little bit more exploration just on this clip alone, or this video alone. So Dr. Köstlbauer, man, thank you. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks
Thank you for having me. It was
appreciate
a pleasure.
All right.
Very interesting.
Yeah. And so, folks, there you have it. That is our wait a minute, hold on, Khalil. Wait.
Yes, sir.
I don't think this is the last one we do. I thought this was going to be the last interview, and this was a very powerful interview.
The last one,
one more in the chamber, don't we?
Yes, we got one more in the chamber, bro.
One more in the chamber.
Yeah.
I feel like
how did we start this out? I feel
like we started this whole project out with interviewing both Dr. David Eltis and Dr. Nafeez Khan, right?
Right.
And we focused on enslavement. We focused on slavevoyages.com, the work that they had done with that. But I feel like, what do you think? I feel like we should end it the way that we started it.
Yeah, because people were questioning boats. Right?
Yeah.
Something about boats.
Right.
And where the ship's at.
Where the ship's at, slave boat hunting, right? I feel like maybe we should end it with something like that.
I think so, bro.
I think so. For those of you out there, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for hanging in there for this very, very knowledgeable 2-hour interview. We're definitely going to be running this back. In fact, we're going to be running back our most previous interview with Janet Rainey, as well as and the guest stars of that show, of course, which were Chief Atkins and Chief Shields. But again, y'all take it easy. Be ready to see us. We're going to let you guys know about that one. Where we're planning to do it. It should be tonight. If not tonight, maybe tomorrow, but we'll let you know ahead of time. But again, if those of you out there for supporting it, thank you so much. And keep going over to YouTube. All right. We got it. Peace.